Hello and welcome to the ALN 2020 Asset Leadership Forum, Restructuring America. I'm Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited to be starting off today's event, Federal Law Enforcement Asset Leadership. Two notes before we get started. We have been getting interest in the ALN approach to asset leadership and asset management, so we want to make sure you, attendees, panelists, whoever, are aware of the 2-week web course leading to ALN A55K professional certification. This course is starting November 9th, and feel free to check out our website for more information. Last note before we get started, if you have any questions or comments during today's event, please feel free to comment or ask a question in the chat section of this Zoom webinar. There's also a Q&A function you can use, but either way, we'd love to hear from you. And now without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Moshe Nelson, Principal and Asset Management Lead, Grant Thornton. Moshe?
Thank you so much, Nick. And if you could bring up the slides.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic.
Will do.
No problem. I'm Moshe Nelson. I'm a principal with Grant Thornton, and I lead our asset management solution. I'm also a senior fellow with the Asset Leadership Network and head up our law enforcement asset management working group. Today, I will first introduce the panel. We have some great guest speakers here that can provide significant perspectives on law enforcement asset management, why it's unique, and some of the recent events that have maybe affected it, and plan moving forward. I'll also provide background on the law enforcement logistics and asset management working group that we set up last year, a brief recap on the symposium that was held in the December period, and then I'll turn it to Executive Director Ken Burgess to provide the keynote for our panel, and then we'll dive into the panel discussion itself. Nick, you can go to the next slide. Perfect. So for today's panel, we are joined with Ken Burgess, Eric Brown, and Al Green. Unfortunately, Chief Karen Lopez from FBI was not able to make the discussion. I'm going to give a quick introduction for each of our speakers. Ken Burgess is the Executive Director of the Asset and Logistics Office of the Chief Readiness Support Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Burgess was with the United States Coast Guard during its early adoption of the asset management system thinking, and is now Executive Director at CRSO. He's critical in the application of asset management systems. Mr. Eric Brown, Senior, was recently named as an ALN Senior Fellow and is Director of the Mobile Assets and Personal Property Office of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security headquarters. Eric was previously with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 9 years before his current position. Eric is also the current NPMA President of the Parliamentarian and past President of the NPMA Harbor Lights Chapter. Finally, we have Mr. Al Green, Chief of the Asset Management Division at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Al has been involved in government asset management for many years. Al has worked his way through the Department of Interior and FEMA, where he was responsible for developing and recommending policies and procedures in compliance with the department's strategic plan. He has bridged personal property and real property best practice approaches and comes from ICE again. We'll go to the next slide. So the Law Enforcement Asset Management Working Group was set up last year with the goal to truly collaborate across this, what is a very similar community that spans several different departments of the federal government. The hopes were to provide cross-governmental collaboration, identify and share best practices, efficiencies, cost savings opportunities, and discuss solutions to law enforcement's specific set of asset management challenges. The federal law enforcement community required really a forum to collaborate on these specific asset management needs and solutions. And we've already seen quite a bit of benefit in this collaboration over the past year. Go to the next slide. In the December timeframe of 2019, pre-COVID, we held the first law enforcement asset management symposium with the Asset Leadership Network. It was a great event. We had over 50 individuals from DHS, ICE, Department of Justice, ATF, DEA, FBI, and CBP. And we talked about inventory best practices, where technologies of the future were going, telematics, passive and active tracking, and then mission impact and alignment. And through that conversation, there were many organic connections that were developed across agencies, and the ability to collaborate on similar problems and instances. And I think when we were faced with COVID-19 and the impacts that it has on the community, we really saw a lot of that natural communication and collaboration happening between agencies and departments. Next slide. So with that, we'll turn to our keynote presentation from Ken. Nick, would you mind bringing up Ken's presentation?
Will do, Moshe. 1 minute.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Moshe, and thank you for everybody at the Asset Leadership Network. It's actually my second opportunity in a week to speak, and we talked about real property last week and some initiatives we have there at DHS. And today we're talking about something that is very much at the forefront of DHS and all agencies, particularly law enforcement agencies, is the subject of PPE. I see this as kind of an informal discussion. I have some slides, but I know Al Green, I know Eric Brown have a lot of experience with the department, a lot more than I have, quite frankly. So, and Jack Kelly's got the OMB experience, and Moshe, of course. So please feel free to add in as you'd like. Next slide, please. So I guess why is law enforcement? What's the difference about law enforcement? Well, law enforcement in DHS, we have many components, but the components that are primarily conducting law enforcement missions, and those missions don't stop during pandemics. So the law enforcement mission continues, and we have to be able department-wide to provide our frontline operators with PPE to conduct their operations safely. So that's overall what we're trying to do. I'll skip around a little bit here, but first of all, I don't know, Jack, if you were at OMB back then, but back in April, and I can't take credit for it. I just started working at the CRSO office in April, but we did receive $178.3 million in CARES Act funding for PPE, and it's 2-year money, which really helps us. It's not just 1-year money, it's 2-year money. We received that funding, and over the years, DHS has some different approaches with PPE. And again, I'll just talk to you a little bit of how I feel. One of the problems with PPE is it's relatively inexpensive. So it really, despite everybody's best efforts, no matter how it was managed within the department, there was probably not the amount of oversight that would be done. Should be more expensive equipment. And so once the pandemic's over, it's at the forefront. The pandemic's over. A lot of this equipment's $3, $4, and you need so much of it. DHS has tried a couple different initiatives over the years, but essentially even distributing them out to the components. But then there wasn't the oversight to make sure that the PPE was still active and good equipment. It's got a shelf life, so that's challenging as well. So you've got so long term PPE is tough to manage from a departmental perspective. It's not high dollar. It's very critical when you need it, but when you don't need it, it's not so critical. But the decision was made for DHS, our office, to centrally manage the funding. That's a little different. We could have, for instance, taken $178.3 million and proportioned it out to the components. There's 23 components, but I'll call them 12 law enforcement components. We could have done that. Decision was made to centrally manage it. And interestingly, I call it the miracle of pork. the folks that work for me and our systems folks came up and developed a system in record time that allows us as an ordering process and tracking system for the PPE. So the components order it through port, we take it, we allocate it, send it over to the budget people, send it over to procurement people, and they go out and buy it in very simple terms. But having said that, a port, I call it the Miracle Port. I don't know how it was ever set up so quickly, but if you're familiar with, mature logistics systems are fully integrated. You got procurement is integrated. The warehousing is integrated. If you take something off the shelf, it automatically is recorded in the system. Port's a standalone system. It doesn't talk to any other system. So the good news is we're able to essentially manage it. But the challenge has been it really doesn't connect to the components. So there's a lot of estimates going back and forth. So that's going on. The port system was set up. Most importantly, we got the funding. The port system was set up, and then the key to any initiative, I think anybody who's worked in government, is partnerships. We set up a task force. Again, my folks who work in logistics integration office, and there's really only two guys, quite frankly, fully engaged with this. And each component, for instance, Al Green has a representative from ICE that we call the PPE task force. And they meet once a week. And that's how we communicate back and forth on the our critical priorities and the initiatives and any issues that are being faced by the components with the COVID-19 PPE distribution. And I think the other thing we have to be careful about at headquarters is we're not staffed to, we don't do this on a daily basis. And I think anything from my perspective over the years that's done at headquarters, you got to be real careful. The whole idea is to get the proper equipment out to the components. And the further you're away from the field, you lose that a little bit. And so that's been a little bit of a challenge too. It's not the fact we want to get it all in the system. We got to get it out to Al Green and his folks and other folks so they can actually use it. And that's a little bit of a challenge, I think, when you try to run something from headquarters. But that's something I'm very cognizant of and we're working on. Secondly, a vendor task force. Our folks, again, just these two folks are constantly meeting up to twice a week with vendors across the government. We're in a tough situation. There's a high demand for the PPE, and the vendors, and the vendors. There's only so many vendors, and it's been. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit, but again, the partnership and the fact that we centrally managed all of the input. So we're not ordering for just one organization within DHS. We're ordering for all the components. That does give us some leverage because there's material amounts that we're requesting for vendors. So that helps us with our leverage. Secondly, quite frankly, I do think several vendors are really looking to help the country. And when they see a law enforcement agency needs PPE, they're willing to step up. And perhaps, they do realize the importance. That's helped us at all as well. Going down to the last bullet, one of our most difficult initiatives was respirators. Again, a great demand for respirators and a limited amount of suppliers. We've done a couple things. We had N95. What are called respirators, and that's what everybody wants. It's OSHA certified. From FEMA, we were getting we were able to supplement that with KN95s. Not quite as effective, but does work for a lot of law enforcement operations. Secondly, our folks did a great job with our procurement folks getting together with 3M and Honeywell, and now we are on 3M is delivering us 330,000 a month for the next year. And Honeywell just delivered us 7 million respirators. So we've gone from, I'd say in the July timeframe, I didn't think we were going to have enough respirators to see us through the end of the year. Through a lot of hard work, through a lot of partnership with vendors, now we're getting complaints that the components warehouse don't have enough room for some of our PPE. So that's a good problem to have. If you're sitting in a warehouse, you're not that happy, but certainly from my perspective, really happy to have that problem compared to everything else we could be working with. Next slide, please. Anybody have any questions on that at all? And this is a slide presentation we actually sent to the Undersecretary of Management. The text Al's are presented to him 2 weeks ago. But the good news is we expended $20 million, and actually that's a misleading figure. At the end of September, over $26 million of PPE was delivered to components throughout DHS, and obligated and coming down the road is another $60 million worth of material. So you can see where we thought we were short. Now I think we're a little bit more worried about when this $60 million worth of material starts, that pipeline really starts hitting. Are we going to have enough room? We'll figure that out. But a much different problem than we had just 3 or 4 months ago. And that the breakdown of the product received is below that as well. The other thing that's interesting is you've got unique component requirements. Secret Service is a component agency. Obviously, very high risk mission with the Secret Service. So gloves, how hard can gloves be? Well, there's like 6 or 7 different types of sizes associated with gloves. And of course, trying to get the ones that Secret Service would desire are the toughest to get. So those are the kind of little things behind the scene. We're working. We may go back to Secret Service, for instance, and say, I know you really want 6 millimeter gloves thickness. Well, could you live with 5 millimeter? And then those are the type of things we're constantly doing with the components, because the 5 mil gloves we can get, the 6 mil gloves is going to be challenging. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, starting in FY21, I'll tell you one of the challenges. I was the executive director of the Coast Guard Surface Forces Logistics Center, 1,800 people located all over the world, supporting Coast Guard ships and boats. And in the Coast Guard, ships and boats really matter. And it was all about the parts, So we always, and it took a while, but we really had a system where we knew exactly where the parts were. And the system, again, was fully integrated. For instance, demand, if you're running any logistics system, it's based on demand, and the port system does not automatically generate demand. So that's been challenging. We have to rely on the components to estimate demand over a monthly basis and constantly update it. But, in a perfect world that we would have a system operating for PPE that would just automate like most major logistics systems. We still have $97 million in CARES Act funding, and it's 2-year money again. So we have another year to obligate that funding. And the only other thing I'd really like to emphasize is, so we're looking long-term when we talk about safety stock. The Department of Homeland Security, overlooking for the components for PPE, again, has tried several different things. What we'd like to do is DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, has a what's called a War Stopper program. And there's different ways to look at it, but what we would like to see done is to essentially have a contract with DLA. DLA would coordinate that contract with vendors. And the requirement would be, again, hopefully we get this through this COVID-19 PPE, and it's a distant memory in a couple months. And then hopefully there's no pandemics for 2 or 3 years. But when that next pandemic comes, that the vendor has a minimum amount of inventory for PPE and inventory that they will supply to us, to supply to DHS, so we can get through the initial hump. Because in the past, just the way PPE is managed, it just, when you need it, when you really need it, it's very difficult to get to. We want to have what I'm going to call insurance stock or safety stock. We're in negotiations with that. My guess is, my guess is that's not a cheap. that could be relatively expensive, and we don't have an overwhelm. I'll have to get with Jack Kelly and learn the secrets of OMB and how to get money from OMB. But it's going to be expensive. But from my perspective, it's really worth the risk. So that's what we're looking long term. I don't know if it's going to be successful. HHS also has a stockpile. We're starting negotiation with HHS to see if we could somehow get an initial quantities set aside for us, but we haven't figured that out yet. But that's our really big push is, well, our number one push is continuing to get our hardworking component law enforcement personnel the PPE they need. Secondly, long term, what are we going to do about PPE? We can't be going up and down. We got to smooth, like any logistics system, you got to smooth out the demand cycle somehow. So we're hoping a war stopper program or something similar to that will help us. And that's it. Any questions at all, or?
Yeah, Ken, let me follow up on a couple of points you made. And given your experience with the United States Coast Guard before coming to DHS, Chief Readiness Support Officer, I think that this is going to remain true. COVID-19 was a great example of, I'll call it an outside event that was not predicted, hitting the United States, and DHS having to very quickly mobilize resources, processes, people across diverse components to address PPE in this case or other infrastructure safety requirements. Can you talk a little bit about, the positives and negatives of how DHS has historically done this, being underutilized, under-resourced, and the ability to, bring these components together and processes together quickly to address the challenge?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. There's many different challenges across DHS. I think 250,000 people, but what I've learned, and I've only been, I think a 6-month mark was just this week. One thing I've learned is each component brings different talent levels, and there, in essence, there's always one or two components that does something very well. Okay, and it could be PPE. How do you distribute PPE? It could be Eric Brown, vehicles, or So when the crisis comes, I think what I feel like is a couple things. First of all, DHS is recognized as a critical agency for the United States government. So you do get attention from, if you get $178 million for PPE, that's a really good thing. So it's right off the bat you have that. Second, internally, I think when I talked to my guys in LIO, a Logistics Integration Office, and they were setting it up, there was somebody in CBP, Customs and Border Protection, who had figured the whole thing out. And then so they sat down with a person in Customs and Border Protection and at least got port working, and I'm sure there are other experts out there, but my thing is, one is the reputation that DHS has, but two, we've had components doing different types of law enforcement missions or whatever missions for a long time, and they're very, very good at it. And no matter what we're doing, whether it's real property or COVID-19 PPE, what we're really trying to do is take the shining light and bring everybody up together with a shining light, I guess the best way to put it.
Eric or Al, any other perspectives regarding that question of how, DHS or the components at ICE were able to mobilize, very uniquely to address, in this case, it was PPE requirements?
Well, in my case, we dealt with sanitization across the department. And of course, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, probably. But, the questions were coming from the field, not just from the fleet management offices or for the components, property offices of how do we decontaminate our vehicles? We still have to do our operations. I mean, we didn't get into the PPE in my section very much. Of course, I was familiar with PPE working from ICE and then coming to headquarters. However, we had to give them guidance on what to do. And, my office created a document at least to put out at the department level, which was in line with CDC guidelines on how to decontaminate vehicles, because the law enforcement folks still had to do their job. As Ken mentioned, the criminals don't stop. Some of them might go sit down while COVID's going on, but they're still doing criminal things. Investigations still have to continue. Detainees still have to be transported. So, there's the PPE requirement for that. And then how do you decontaminate the vehicle after? So yeah, it's been busy. It's been busy. The past 6-7 months have been extremely busy.
This is Al. At the onset of COVID-19, when I got the phone call from the chief financial officer directing me to be the the point of contact for ICE component. I didn't realize what he was putting me into. At the very beginning, it resulted in being able to care for 20,232 ICE personnel. The major portion of that being law enforcement officers, about 7,500, and the rest being non-law enforcement. Also, at the very beginning, there was very little structure, and Ken already mentioned this, but a red team was put together under Robert King at DHS, and I was part of that team, and we actually showed what we were doing with our weekly report, because at the very onset, we didn't really have everything was so decentralized when it came to PPE. So by getting a weekly report, we showed that to DHS as a potential adoption. I think they used some of it, but the report actually turned out to be a very good tool managed by DHS, and being able to put in those requirements. And what I found in ICE is that I had to set up a logistic structure. Not only myself, but I had to have 2 acquisition senior advisors to add to the team. DHS allowed us to have a primary, which was myself, and then 2 other individuals that would deal on the biweekly meetings with the pandemic team from DHS. And I'd just like to put kudos out for both Jama and Mr. Diego Garcia. They did great in supporting ICE requirements. And the fact that initially when we started out, the structure was there was really no structure. I had to develop that. So developed for the 270 locations, I have 5 primary programs within ICE, and I have 5 main contacts for point of contact for PP&E. But on top of that, there's 270 locations that we have, not only domestic, but international, that had to be taken care of. And one of the challenges that we initially had was that, for example, the U.S. embassies and the U.S. mail was actually shutting down in many of the locations because there was either no flights going into those countries, or else people were staying home. So initially the orders went into DHS around the March, April timeframe. And then we started receiving our first PPE in July. And DHS worked out some wonderful things on being able to get us some KN95s and KN90s from FEMA, which worked out very well. It supplemented our cloth face masks that we were using, some face shields and goggles. And then next came the 9205 respirators, which was mentioned. We get about 333,000 every month for the next 12 months for a total of about 4 million. And again, at the very onset of COVID-19, DHS, along with all the other federal agencies, were really not in competition, but the health and medical and first responders were getting almost everything. And so we had to kind of wait in turn for that to develop for us to be able to get something either from the national stockpile or for the vendors to get to a point with the production that could start providing to the federal agencies. And as of this month, like Ken mentioned before, all those orders that we did in phase 1 are all starting to come in at the same time. And so with people still in phase 1 and trying to reconstitute to phase 2 for the COVID-19 to bring at least 25 to 50% of employees back to work, which unfortunately, it seems like we're spiking again in many of the areas. We can't bring our people. Every time we try to bring them in, someone gets COVID-19, and then we have to reduce back down again. So again, we're getting pretty saturated on PP&E. I think that's a wonderful thing, but we're also having to expand our storage. We're also trying to divert from our locations directly to our warehouse that we have in Maryland. And we're doing quite well right now. And we're actually looking at our risk assessment to reassess that to ensure that we have to take a look at the different phases that occur. I mean, we're talking about phase 1 where it's up to 25%, phase 2 is up to 50%, and phase 3 basically to get everybody back to where we were before pre-COVID-19. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Initially, it was very challenging. Like DHS with Jamie, I know it cannot be done without having a great team behind you, and it's really worked pretty well for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Al. Ken, any last thoughts to add before we shift to general discussion outside of PPE?
No, I actually have to run, but I really appreciate the chance to talk, and I appreciate the subject too. And being new, like real property, was kind of tough. We're COVID-19 PP. Certainly not expert, but I've been living the dream like everybody else, like Al and Eric with the COVID-19 PP. It's really important, and like Al mentioned, it was tough getting going just because what you're competing against with the medical community, for instance, where it should be, but it's been a great learning experience and a great collaboration across the department, and when we're dealing with across other agencies, everybody's been very collaborative. It's actually a good news story on what could have been a very bad news story, I think so.
Yeah, very good. Well, Ken, thank you for your presentation and for the work that
Thank
you're
you.
doing over in logistics.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
again. Thanks for kind words on ICE.
Thank you, Al.
All
Keep him
right,
straight,
Al.
Eric.
He always does.
He does.
Working on it.
All right. We'll shift to some of the more general questions. This one we've covered a little bit with COVID-19, but I think that there's been a lot that has happened since the symposium, almost a year ago. On top of COVID-19, social unrest, dynamic outside threats, from new state actors, and cyber threats. How has asset management changed for the law enforcement community over this time, given what the country is going through and the outside actors?
You want me to go first?
Go for it.
So in my opinion, so first of all, from the operational side, I can't speak to on what the department does operationally, and I dare to even dive into that. However, from the support side, all of our leadership, when it comes to social unrest and those kind of things, are sensitive to that, and they've told us and in all of our dealings to be sensitive to that, because some of the complaints are extremely legitimate, and we need to take into consideration the climate of the country when we think about doing our business and who we're actually supporting as a department. Terrorist threats to handle. That's the operational side. I don't really get into that. I have my feelings about it, of course, but I let the operators that respond to those things do so accordingly. How things have changed since last year. Oh my goodness. When we sat down last, was it November? We had no idea how COVID would be impacting how we do business across the board. And then, of course, when it really hit us in March, it took a big impact. But I'll say this, I said that to say this: law enforcement support has not stopped. Nothing has stopped other than a few things, but for the most part, giving support to the department and law enforcement has not stopped. I've been in this house since March 12th. The work has not stopped. My people have not stopped supporting the mission. Across the board, inventories were still getting completed. Nothing has stopped. Where the law enforcement officers and agents need their equipment, it's been there. Servicing their equipment is still being done. Availability, still being done. So all of those things, it only impacted us by where we do business, not necessarily how we do business, because a good percent of our business within the logistics realm, specifically in property and fleet, is technically done online. It's done virtually. It's done by email. Now we have Zoom meetings. We have team meetings. We still meet. We just don't meet in a specific building or a specific office. We've partnered with a bunch of people that we had no idea we'd ever need to partner with. Sanitization of vehicles, I mentioned that earlier. I created some guidelines based on CDC guidance and submitted that to all the fleet managers throughout the department, because one of the things that, of course, even though it's a safety and health issue, they've come into CRSO for how to desanitize your vehicle or your buildings and stuff. And we're not experts at sanitization, but we've become experts at sanitization because we had to read the guidance and we had to put out something. So from the facility side, I really can't talk to it, but I do know that there's been guidance submitted to all facilities managers across the department on what is needed to be done. Of course, the new technology is constantly coming out. The document that I created for vehicle sanitization was, again, based on CDC guidelines, because at the end of the day, most of us have vehicles. You look at the owner's manual, tell you how to clean the seats and all of that kind of stuff, but that's not the same thing. Ford Motor Company, we partnered with them through S&T, not CRSO, but through S&T, Science and Technology. There was a study done with Ford Motor Company, and I want to say it was University of Michigan, or I don't remember what school it was. However, they came up with an app for Ford Interceptor vehicles, and I think it's from 2013 to present. That app allows only Ford Interceptors right now to be heated up to 133 degrees, and you leave it on for 15 minutes, and that sanitizes the vehicle.
Wow.
So, when you have information like that, it's not just good to know. You need to get it out there. So one of the things that through our normal fleet management council, we put that information out, and we said, don't just keep it to yourselves, get it to the field, get it to the operators. The app is free to federal and state and local law enforcement. All they have to do is go to the dealer and get it installed. It may cost, but it may not. I mean, but that's the individual dealership part. But at the end of the day, that's the method to do it. Ford Motor Company also, through the study, said that you could leave it in the sun for a while too. That'll do the same thing. So if you don't want to pay for the app, if you're not using the vehicle, park it in the sun, allow the sun to do its job. And you leave it in the sun for, a few hours, and it's likely sanitized, especially on hot days. And most of our stuff is on the southwest border, so that's no problem there to decontaminate the vehicle if you want to use that method. So, I mean, there's a few things that have been going on since the COVID period kicked in. But again, partnerships. But I do want to stress that no law enforcement organization within the department has suffered. Not at all. The mission continues.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, Eric, I think the workload has only increased, from everybody that's dealing with this response. So it's not just that it's hasn't deteriorated; it has actually increased. And I know that it's more of a 24/7 operation now. Just given the needs and the mission, the dedication of the people of Homeland Security.
So one of the things I talk about my commute time is less. I live 18 minutes from my job, but a commute can take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on the day. Yeah. And me personally, I know a lot of people don't, but I park when I drive to DC, so I'm actually saving time and money being home. However, they're getting their money's worth out of me now. I log in at 7 in the morning and pretty much stay on until like 6, and then throughout the evening, if I get something, I'll respond to it. I don't like to have things sitting around. So not just doing your normal logistics stuff and your property and fleet stuff that I do, of course, all our personnel stuff, all of those other things that come along with doing this job. So I emphasize it does not stop, and it has increased a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that, hopefully when we get through this, we'll do an after action analysis and say, well, how could we set ourselves up even in the remote environment more effectively, so as to be able to, work that 8 hours and then control, the other asks that come in, right? And they may be coming in through instant message and text message and email and, just landline. So I think that's a little lesson learned.
Yeah, we're in constant contact. I leave my phone upstairs now sometimes.
That's right. Al, did you want to share your perspective on how asset management has changed the law enforcement community on your side?
Yeah, I just want to agree with Eric that law enforcement never stood down. I think earlier I said there was like 7,500 law enforcement, but there's actually over 13,000 law enforcement out of that 20,232. The rest are non-law enforcement. And most of the ones that are working remotely are administrative staff workers, which are the non-LEOs. And those law enforcement are still out on doing their day and night jobs. They're still out there very active doing so. One of the examples I wanted to provide today is the fact that the personal property has this requirement to do an annual physical inventory every single year, and ICE has over 208,000 assets on record, and have a young chief property management unit, Miss Porche Porter. She actually worked with her team, Kimon and Miss Hunter, to develop a virtual inventory by using mobile phones, taking pictures of barcodes, and worked out a template and was able to complete 100% of the inventory this year in a virtual environment, which for me is a first. And being a consulting fellow for the National Property Management Association, Eric would probably agree with me that this would make a great article for the property magazine, something working in a virtual environment. So it just goes to show you what can be done. What, even if there's a challenge, that the staff can raise up to that challenge and take it on and be able to develop a scheme and a plan in order to take care of a requirement. And that requirement got us to a point that we could actually respond before 30 September to the department. So it was a great job in a virtual environment in a pandemic world.
That's exceptional work, and I think a great best practice to share across the law enforcement community, and executing that.
So to add to what Al was saying, and of course, definite kudos to Al, Kimon Fevrier, and Porche Porter for doing this. Some of my proteges, kind of, I guess. But at the end of the day, the virtual environment was extremely challenging. And, you know, there was a public law that came up a couple of years ago, 115-419, where, you know, it kind of relaxed the requirement for inventory by just dealing with cap assets or capitalized assets. But, you know, at the department, we have a more stringent, we dig a little deeper because we have so many sensitive assets and assets that are into equipment class codes that we just want to make sure that we capture properly. So of course, that's what Al is talking about, the annual requirement for 100% inventory. But, you know, it does allow for electronic verification. If I am issued a phone or a computer, somebody runs a report that says Eric Brown logged into that computer, chances are Eric Brown's got that computer. So we just do a verification. So there's so many different methods other than physically just touching it to ensure that that the asset is there and who has it. So, you know, it's supposed to be reported lost if you lost it, if you do it doing your job properly, because you need another computer or another phone if you've lost a damaged one. But an electronic verification is a great method to supplement the physical touch of an actual asset. So thank you again.
Excellent. Move on to the next question related to ISO 55000. As 55,000 practitioners, we know that the ultimate goal is to drive value within an organization. So wanted to know, what does value mean to the law enforcement asset management, and has that changed over time?
So from my point of view, value to the law enforcement community, they want what they want and they need what they need. It goes back to the facilities must be there. And I think I saw 55,000 more points to the availability and the accountability and the property management systems, all related to value, right? So value to the agent, to the officers and agents, though, means that the assets are there and they're in working condition, be it a building, be it a phone, be it a gun, be it a car. As long as we're maintaining and keeping track of that stuff, and making sure that they're properly maintained and doing those things. Of course, some of those things they're responsible for themselves, but we just want to make sure that we account for everything that they need and to bring value to them. I would guess just having it there when they need it. We have people a hell of a lot smarter than I am that handle facilities, both the department and the components, that make sure that their consolidated buildings are available, that the buildings are serviceable. Of course, then we have mandates to freeze the footprint or reduce the footprint of a particular agency or the government as a whole for efficiency purposes. So again, to meet those needs of those law enforcement folks across the board, I think it's still critical, whether we reduce or not. And again, availability, I think, is that term that I would use across the board. If it's available to them.
One of the things that we're looking at for my asset management division is trying to develop what I call AMD strategic plan, and also to eventually lead to a possible certification of ISO 55000 in asset management, and developing a 5-year plan that captures 4 main ingredients. One is to capture and realize the value of assets through the application of best practice of asset management principles that enable ICE mission fulfillment. The second one is to establish a framework to guide the management of assets through aligned roles, responsibilities, policies, and objectives. The third is to establish a governance structure to ensure employees, data, and tools are the best capable for the assigned tasks. And then fourth and final is to ensure a culture of stewardship of asset management resources, maximize utilization, and minimize waste. If I can get those 4 things done in 5 years, then we'll be further ahead. Always seeking improvement in the value for our customers.
You need to share that with us, Al.
Yes, sir.
And one of our attendees did pose the question. I think it's a very good one. Thinking of value as the end stakeholder, and that's the American public. And they point out value being derived as the intangible truth of justice and the American way. Are you able to tie the value that's delivered to, I would say, your internal customers, which are the officers and agents that are executing the law enforcement mission, all the way down to safeguarding the American public from outside threats, acts of terrorism, as well as domestic violence?
I think this is Al. I think the best way to answer that is that we all have strategic goals and objectives, and I have not only with the chief financial officer, but we have the management and administration strategic goals. We have the ICE strategic goals, as well as DHS strategic goals. Those all tie into protecting the American public against a variety of threats, and that's what we build. Actually, what I'm building my AMD strategic plan off of is tying into all those different values and to protect.
Very good. Now, Eric,
if that doesn't answer the question, maybe there'd be a follow-up. Thank you.
So, one of the things within CRSO is called being prepared with affordable readiness. And that's the CRSO tagline. And being ready is what we do. I mean, the CRSO is one of the key management functions within the department that handles all logistics, facilities, asset logistics, and Ken mentioned the logistics and the integration office. I just think being ready as a department to handle all things and give the public the confidence that they need. I mean, you talk about domestic terrorism and all those other things that fall into that category. CRSO is just, again, trying to make sure that the things are available to those components, and we support the components any way we can to make sure that they're operationally ready. Domestic terrorism and all of those different things that's handled at a department level from the operations side, like ICE, Secret Service, CBP. But again, we have to make sure that, we talk about truth in the American way, giving the public confidence that we're doing what we're supposed to do, and the agents can do what they're supposed to do. Yeah,
very good. And Eric, on this next question, I'm really fascinated to hear your response, given experience at ICE and then moving to the purview of the department. So you get seeing across all the different components. Given purview across national locations, what are some of the benefits and challenges to managing assets as a system over the past year? You're still on mute, Eric, so.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. Yeah, I put myself on mute for a reason.
Yeah.
Well, systems, one of the things that we do face as a department right now is systems. And it's not necessarily the fact that one component uses one system versus another using, there's SAP, it's CDP, there's Sunflower and other components. And a system challenge to me has always been, and even Ken talked about the logistics machine, like they had there at his logistics center in Baltimore. I think I mentioned this last year, and I will preach it until that Holy Grail is found. There's no one system that does it all with the same regularity for acquisitions, accountability, procurement. You have a good property system that might do accounting. You have a good property system that might do procurement. You have a financial system that might do finance and procurement. But then each system, you will never find one that does all three with the same regularity. I mean, one may have to be modified to fit. But I think that's even at Sunflower, when I was at ICE, the financial folks don't see it the same way as the property folks. There's two audiences and there's two different languages. We try to tie it together. It doesn't always work. And at the department, it's pretty much the same thing. We're pulling. We have this system called CAPSIS that pulls. It's basically a data warehouse that pulls data from across the department, and it's our data warehouse where we get all of the information pulled into one system. And we're still struggling with standardizing data so that we can talk apples to apples to each system we pull from. We have a data management committee that is working on that specifically. It's called MAP DMC, Mobile Asset Personal Property Data Management Committee. And we have separate communities of interest set up to standardize that data and that information. But system-wise, if there was one thing that we could pull off the shelf and say, hey, this is it, I would love to see that before I retire. I mean, there may be some people, and other people may have some input to say, hey, our system does all of that. Yeah, but your system may do all of that, but is it the same level for each line of business? Is it the same level for procurement? And is it the same level for property, and is it the same level for finance? So that's what I see at the department level, and it still hasn't changed. Even some of the best systems that have been in place for years had to be modified to do it. You can't just pull it off the shelf and say this is it.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, or shall I move to the next question? All right. We'll move on to some innovation questions. So how has technological innovation helped or hindered your ability to manage assets? What are some of the barriers to technological adoption, whether that's cultural, financial, security, or lack of a vendor base?
I think that's a great question. I'm one for innovation and being able to use devices that can ease the workload on my staff. I think one of the most recent devices is the telematics device. We use it on a limited basis within ICE. We have one program that is pushing to do over 4,000 vehicles with telematics. They understand that it takes the manual, the operator out of the process, and basically use an electronic device that can transmit the same information that's required for us to report under the SAVE Act. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is the only applicant of the SAVE Act that has a requirement of 5 data elements that have to be tracked based on congressional law. And I know Eric can speak more to that, but I think the telematics offers an opportunity to increase our knowledge of utilization of the vehicles. And it takes the staff out of the in between, and the data can go directly in from one system to another. Again, like Eric said, it's not really integrated, but I think it provides an opportunity to be better. The other innovative thing that's been around for some time is the mobile phones. And I think by instituting apps utilizing mobile phones is a way to go with for those operators that continue to provide data on their utilization of their vehicles, for example. And I think that that way we can cover all the bases as we add apps. I know that the Office of OCIO Information Office is trying to increase the number of apps that are available. It takes 6 to 9 months to actually go through all the security checks and everything. But I think that that's going to be a commonplace in the future. I mean, you can't go anywhere nowadays and not see somebody looking at a tablet or a mobile phone. So I think we're actually seeing GPS devices within the vehicles now. There's all these capabilities that are available to ease the workload. And I think as asset managers, especially in the law enforcement environment, anything that we can do to take the administrative burden off of our law enforcement and non-law enforcement officers is very critical for the success of ICE.
Yeah, that it's a great point, Al. The technological innovation and the advances in telematics or low frequency Bluetooth or RFID, they've been out there for years, and we see the price point of this technology getting lower, or the adoptability being enhanced because you can now access it through mobile devices, whereas 10 years ago that wasn't the case. What hurdles do you see in terms of adoption of these technologies? And I think part of that question is, by the time you adopt something, there's a new technology out there that has surpassed it. So, what are some examples that you've seen in the past, or some hurdles that you face that others may be able to benefit from hearing about?
So our biggest hurdle with telematics, and of course, thank you, Al, for speaking of that, because that was going to be my topic. I wanted to make sure that we brought up telematics.
Sure.
First of all, like Al said, telematics relieves the operator from fingering in numbers, fuel use, all of those different things. Telematics captures all of that. So the administrative burden on the law enforcement agents and officers, they can take the time and go elsewhere and do something else. Keep investigating. You don't have to log these things in. However, we do have a segment of the department that will not use them. But there were some security reasons that were brought up legitimately. It's not just waived across the board. Everybody, the CRSO requirement is all medium and light duty vehicles within the department will have telematics. We're close to being there. I would say CBP is one of the largest organizations, and they're like 95% there now. They're just testing the remaining devices, and from now forward, CBP will be 100%. As a department, 51,000 vehicles approximately. I would say out of those 51,000, 60% are law enforcement, and the majority of them have telematics because they're leased. So telematics, we either have them installed one of two ways. There's a blanket purchase agreement that the department has stood up with 3 different vendors, or if we're leasing the vehicles, they're coming from GSA. GSA has a telematic solution in place by a company called Geotab, which is actually one of our BPA vendors. And as vehicles roll out, because they're GSA owned, we're just leasing them. They're having telematics installed on them. How we do telematics is not necessarily from an administrative purpose. And I think we've had to hit that ball home several times to the law enforcement folks. That we're not trying to track your business. We only want to use vehicle. We only want vehicle utilization information. We only want mileage. We only want, the things that validate what we have called the SAVE Act. So the SAVE Act is public law 115 give me 1 second here, 11538, Stop Asset Vehicle Excess Act. And it's only imposed on the Department of Homeland Security, no one else. So that's a law that tells us we have to provide the information for these vehicles to show utilization and do what we can to minimize the fleet where we can. So we have those things in place to keep us on track. And again, because it's a law, it makes a difference. You have a law, and you can't, and an agency or a component can't say, well, we're not going to do. Well, it's a law. You're violating the law if you don't do it. So we don't have the luxury of some other agencies where, you know, you can do it or not. And I think the law enforcement community that we work with is understanding that we're not just doing this to get at you. We don't care how many high-speed pursuits you have, unless somebody within your organization cares. We just want to make sure that you're using the asset properly and that's available to you. Again, availability is my thing. If you're using it properly and we're tracking utilization, there's no way at the end of the year or whenever we decide to do a vehicle allocation methodology or VAM, that you can say the vehicle's not being used. And use translates into two different things. You know, you may be, you know, mileage, and it may be undercover, it may be sitting on a border island, but you're still using it because that's the mission requirement. So
Yeah.
I think we're good there.
Yeah, a little passionate about that. That's
yeah,
great,
a
Eric.
little bit, man.
I do want to give a shout out. I know we've already complimented ICE on the work they've done in the department, but I also hear GSA. You know, I know that was a monumental effort getting that telematics contract out there for the government to improve, you know, leased vehicles and have it on hand, as well as CBP for implementing the telematics on their side.
So on one note on that too. Of course, you know, our contract, because we were trying to get ahead of the curve on the executive order to get telematics installed. I mean, we being a department. So that's why it was opposed in 2017. Let's get these things done. We had it tested for security and mitigated any risk. We had a VOLPE certification test on it. But the one for GSA is FedRAMP certified. And, you know, FedRAMP certification is not easy to get, just in case anybody doesn't know. But once you reach that FedRAMP certification, you're trusted across the federal government. So, you know, that the GeoTab device that they're installing now is FedRAMP certified.
Excellent. Al, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think that covers everything.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think there's, you know, also something you pointed out, Eric, it's like a plus minus, right? So you have the SAVE Act there that has a lot of requirements that, you know, DHS has to abide by. And on one hand, you have the SAVE Act, so it was a forcing factor in a way for the adoption of telematics within the department, you know, across agencies. So there's, you know, there's a positive aspect, and then there's also the other requirements that come along with the SAVE Act. On reporting and accountability and, you know, significant workload that the department and the components have to absorb. So I think that's a fascinating case when you're looking at other law enforcement agencies across the federal department who haven't adopted some of this technological change, you know, because they haven't had a forcing factor there, like DHS, with the pluses and minuses that come along with that. Oh, Eric, you're on mute again. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. So one of the first minuses that I can tell you is that no person with fleet management responsibilities gets a bonus at all. And that's not necessarily just the fleet manager or the director of mobile assets and personal property. That could be CRSO, that could be undersecretary. So anybody that has fleet management responsibilities by law, if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, you will be notified, so to speak, by not getting a bonus. That's just one thing. But the labor portion of it, I don't think that's a big issue. I mean, I know we do more with less, but the fact that we're using telematics makes that less. I mean, doing that more a lot easier. We're still not ingesting all of the data as we want just yet, because we're still working through the kinks on data transmission, data ingestion, primarily because each component has their own contract with our BPA. We as a department, we don't own those contracts. So we have to work and get administrative rights for our data people to pull the data to ingest. We're also working with CBP to establish, well, CBP has had an infrastructure in place for several years at this point using the Syntec Fuel Master system. And that Fuel Master system, as a bonus to upgrading their infrastructure, had telematics included. So we're actually receiving that data on a monthly basis. But as far as the telematics data, because they're also using what they call cellular devices, that is going to be a big bonus once we get all of that pulled at the same time from the same component and the same way from the same components. Just being able to pull all of that data again, it should relieve everybody, or relieve all the operators in the field from having to do all of those reports. I remember when I was at ICE and the agents and the officers, they were completely tired of doing those reports and, you know, submit fuel receipts. They're still having to probably do that, but I'm sure with telematics, it tells me how much fuel they're using, how many miles they've driven, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a lot easier to pull and verify.
Yeah. Are there any non-technological innovations that you've seen within law enforcement asset management that you'd like to share?
Good people. Good people. You know, fortunately, we just brought on a gentleman at the department, Mr. Fabian Cardona. He's a former Air Force person, former consultant with Mercury and Associates, and many of you in the fleet community know Mercury Associates. But he has over 25 years of fleet management experience. I think we've been fortunate enough in CRSO to pull some good people that know some stuff. I was a federal contractor, of course, after I got in the military. I was a federal contractor for many years before I started with ICE. I learned a lot at ICE. I learned a lot as a contractor, and it actually helped. It seems like each thing I've done has built on the next thing, and pulling good people that have those same experiences kind of puts us in a better management perspective on how to do stuff. So that's the least technological thing that you can do, is bring on good people.
Yeah, and all the innovation and knowledge that comes along with it. Definitely agree. Al, anything else to share from your perspective on non-technological innovations?
I'm sorry to say no, I don't have anything. I think I don't really want to go into all the specifics. ICE is really trying to one major program, and actually a smaller program to use telematics on their vehicles. There's still a little resistance from some of the law enforcement, and there's reasons for that. I don't really want to go into, on this particular panel, but Eric is aware of that. The department is aware of it, and we keep trying to coach through the process and keep trying to educate the law enforcement about what protections there are utilizing a telematics device. And I think it's kind of like on an iceberg with a toothpick, kind of chipping away at it a little bit at a time, and eventually we'll get it down to where we got everybody on the same platform, utilizing a device that's actually very good, and again eliminates that administrative burden that they're going through right now. So I think that's where we're heading.
That's excellent. We had a question or statement that was posed to us here, and I think it's important because people often forget about the seized assets that law enforcement has to deal with as part of the job. How have you been able to apply these ISO 55000 management principles to how you address seized assets? There's accountability issues, there's process issues, inventory, cost to the taxpayer, and it's a big problem.
Yeah,
So,
I can.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should let the department go first, Eric. Then I'll follow up.
I mean, there's a process for seized assets, and they go through that same process across the board. CBP is the organization that manages seized assets for the department, right? So whether it's detainee property that was abandoned or turned over during a detention, that the person that left the country did not want it or did not claim it. So I mean, there's still that whole adjudication process that has to go through for every asset. When you talk about seized assets like seized for drug busts, those kind of things, same thing. It's managed by that organization. Some of those assets are actually turned into federal property, but at the end of the day, if they're not, they have to be sold and the money turned over to Treasury. So that's pretty much all I got for that. I mean, seized assets are just what they are.
Yeah. Al,
And
did you make-
yes, just to add to that, I think we average somewhere around maybe 10 seized vehicles a year. Once the courts releases the vehicle to the federal government, then before we actually accept that vehicle, we do a lot of cross checks to ensure that there is still utilization available on that vehicle, and that we just don't accept seized vehicles and add that to our inventory, because we operate under what's called an alternate fleet profile that's approved by the DHS, by Eric, actually his team, and then each year. So when we look at that seized asset, we want to ensure that there is going to be some value to the organization and that it's going to fit in. But we're going to give up an equal vehicle of the same type. If it's like a 4x4, we're going to give up a 4x4 that has outstanding mileage. And actually, usually on seized vehicles, we average anywhere from 2 to 5 additional years of usage of that particular vehicle. So it is becomes an asset, and I think that falls right in line with ISO 5500, getting value for the organization.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think we're rounding out our questions here. So turning to the standard, how do you think that ISO 55000 could be helpful to your organization? Al, you had already brought up strategic asset management planning, but are there other things you'd like to share regarding how 55000 can benefit DHS or ICE in particular?
So I could say that, for example, ICE is organized into multiple programs with differing priority functions and together, and all to achieve their specific mission goals within their own programs, and also for ICE and also for DHS. Specific needs within each program are unique to their individual missions, with a common fundamental need of assets to the right place at the right time to support mission objectives. And ISO 55000 assists with us, enables us to develop our ICE portfolio that consists of, for me, for 3 main units: administrative services for the headquarters environment, personal property for the entire ICE, and also fleet for the entire ICE. So I think it really helps me tremendously with the ICE portfolio for asset management for those 3 units.
Yeah. Eric,
So pretty much I can echo the same thing. Just like Al manages those things for ICE with the components or the subcomponents of programs within ICE, we do the same thing for the 23 components at the department level. So it falls directly in line with those exact same sentiments that Al put forward.
And what impediments might be there for implementing ISO 55000? I know Jim's got come online here. We got him excited once we dive into 55000. But as a enterprise-wide approach, the standardization of taxonomy. Actually, Eric, you mentioned before with the work that you're doing on DMC MAC to ensure that you have all the same data characterizations to be able to manage the portfolio effectively.
Yes.
I imagine is one example.
Yeah, I mean that is one example, but of course, standardization of locations to get the system to talk apples to apples, no matter what system we're listening to. I think primarily where I see ISO 55000 used, not just in personal property management or fleet management, because fleet management is an animal in of its own. But I see ISO 55000 more impacting the facility realm, right? But the spirit of 55000 is pretty much in everything we do, as far as refining our processes, refining our data quality and location quality. So the DMC, the map DMC that I mentioned earlier, it actually digs into the standardization of not just assets, but locations, whether we're going to geotag a device not a device, but a location, so that we can speak apples to apples when we talk about where the assets are. You might have 20 employees in a building. Each employee has a laptop and a phone. So we basically, to standardize that process, to pull all of that data into one set.
Got it. And I saw Jim has joined us. Jim, are there some questions or thoughts you want to also provide, given you've seen all of the different forums and presentations to possibly tie in some concepts into this conversation?
Exactly. It's from an ALN perspective and in these events that we've had over the years. We've gone from what is ISO 55000 to, oh, we might think about that, to we're starting to do a little bit of it. And now in very forward-looking organizations like Homeland Security and Department of State, we see multiple organizations within those agencies and larger organizations starting to adopt these principles. And actually, as Al said, say the word certification. It's interesting. So there's several interesting questions out of that. But a couple of them are, one is, what would be the value of certification to an agency or a component? And then the second part is, so is there, it's exciting to see at DHS that, these assets, lots of asset types, although I still haven't heard IT assets, but lots of asset types, are under the same management organization. Are you seeing synergies across that, or, sharing information about ISO 55000, or is it kind of, springing organically within each of those areas?
So I guess to repeat your question, Jim.
Long-winded, sorry.
No, it's fine. Eric, from the department level, you're hearing ISO 55000 coming up in certain contexts, such as facilities. And then Al, obviously, on ICE, starting to implement it within asset management there. Are there other instances that you see it organically creeping up through components? Is there a larger strategy for adoption?
From my opinion, no. Again, I think this is, to the federal arena, even though it's been around for a while, it's still new. I would say in concept, 55,000 is ingrained in all we do, but I don't think no one has said we're going to implement ISO 55,000 across the board. I don't think that's been done. I don't think anybody's looked at it as a program or a project or a task to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can best answer that too. The fact that the Asset Management Division is developing a strategic plan that's tied to a 5-year plan for developing ISO 55000 and eventually getting certification. I'm basically on an island by myself right now. And what I'm going to have to do is pull in the rest of the continent with the leadership and say, hey, this is how I'm able to do an outstanding, exceptional job with my staff. It's because we've been following these goals and objectives that are outlined in an ISO 55000 format, and get them to raise their eyebrow and say, hey, if it works for him, maybe it'll work for the rest of us. So it's going to take some time. And Moshe and I have discussed this in the past. It's not something that's going to happen right away, but I think eventually, once I draw that continent into the island, I think we're going to be in a much better fashion to build I think once we get maybe one component on board with it, and it won't be across the board, but at least it'll be in as largely as we can, and then maybe get the highlight and get the leadership involved will be very helpful for developing it in federal agencies. Like Eric said, it's been around for some time now, and I think that it's kind of like in my logistics time, we've gone through all these different intervals of different types of management techniques and everything, whether it be TQM or I can't think of all of them, but that's just an example, and I think that ISO Hunter kind of takes the cherry on top of the cream on top of the pie, I think is an opportunity for other organizations to take a look at. So I think that that's the main goal is getting something that's beneficial, that's going to work for all the organizations as well. But it will take some time.
Yeah, and I see the note from David about how the DHS planning program, budgeting, and execution process aligns very closely to the overall ISO management system and model framework. And having been in, I think most of the components of DHS and headquarters for over a decade, you know, when ISO 55000 came out, I know I was drawn to it because I saw a lot of the requirements already being implemented by components, right? Risk management, performance management, strategic planning, essentially bringing in the entire planning process, the PPBE process at the component level. So part of it is articulating all of the good work that's being done in the way ISO 55000 is constructed. And I think once you're able to do that, it will shed light on a lot of the great work that's being done across the department within components. So hopefully it makes the lift a little bit lighter and easier.
Yeah, if I could, I think that's the discussion that I see emerging, and that's what I got into a little bit in my opening, remarks on the first day, is we think about ISO 55000 and assets, but it's really about asset management activities, and aligning those asset management activities is really what a management system is about. That the assets themselves, I mean, obviously, you have systems in place to deal with the assets. It's coordinating those asset management activities that allows the management system approach to bring the value to the organization and achieving the objectives. So I think, in fact, that's one of my recommendations is they start to work on a process of looking at trying to improve ISO 55000 over the next few years, is an increased emphasis on asset management activities. And there's literally thousands of different asset management activities, depending on what you're talking about. And then sort of circle it back to my earlier question is, so in a big organization, it's really an interesting question is there value to have the personal property people and the facilities people kind of working from the same plan, or is there a value to a top level plan, or does it make sense to deal with them individually? I think is a topic that can be revealed as we go forward. Maybe David has something to add on that. I don't know.
Yeah, David, welcome to the panel. And why don't you do a quick introduction for those that don't know you?
Sure, yeah. So I work with Eric quite a bit. I'm on the real property side of the house. So I'm with DHS CRSO's real property office in the headquarters. And like Eric and the others were saying that, as a whole, the department, we've got policies and structures out there. So the department's PPBE process very much aligns with what you would expect in a management system. And I know on the real property side, we're obviously focusing on ISO's recommendation for the 55,000 for assets, and we've presented that in a previous presentation. The challenge, however, is that if you've got a process where you're developing a plan, there's a 5-year plan that goes through a review process, components develop their plan. It's called the RAP, the Resource Allocation Plan. That resource allocation plan goes through a program budget review. Program budget review results in a resource allocation decision. Resource allocation decision goes into the OMB justification, which then goes to congressional justification, then goes to appropriation. Those are lined up with the DHS's strategic plan, and there's a PPBE R, which is essentially the reporting, where you're tying that to the department's strategic plan and the actual how exactly we're measuring the performance. So we've got KPIs that are in the DHS's annual performance plan. So as a whole, the structure is there. That structure very much aligns with ISO 55000, understanding what the context is, doing the plan, operation, execution of plan, measuring performance, et cetera. And you got the cycle there built on leadership, roles, responsibilities, support, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, the structure is there and the requirements are there broadly. What the issue is a lot of times is actually the execution of such a system on the scope of the programs. And what you're getting to, Jim, here about the alignment between assets that are personal property and assets that are real property, a lot of it goes down to actual systems. And Eric talked a lot about that, actual like data systems. You need those data systems to talk, and given the structure of DHS, we're federalized. We have all the components, and those components have subcomponents, and they have legacy systems. It's in principle, I think we're getting there and we're making progress. But the reality is it's not going to be an overnight thing. We're not going to say, on a real property side, we've got our manual, we've got our management system manual. We say, here's the manual, here's the policy, that's where we're going forward. But the reality is it's not going to be a switch. We're not going to say, okay, we have the answer. It's going to take time. And we are definitely working towards that in partnership across our lines of business with Eric and others. And really the transparency is there. And I know our leader, Tom, always says, we can't necessarily always affect the rate at which we get somewhere, but we can affect the direction, and we've got that direction.
Well said.
Yeah, excellent additions. Well, we only have a few minutes left. And David, to one of the things that you mentioned about the RAP process, and what we've seen in some cases, the component levels I think is a good best practice is utilizing the RAP process to align initiatives to risks to performance, and then justifying the budget and aligning to strategic plan, and then ultimately tying that strategic plan into DHS and bringing it all together, which is a lot of the concepts of ISO 55000. So it was a great point. I know we talked about in the first meeting as we kicked off the forum, the National Asset Leadership Strategy, and then the development of the SALs, the sector asset leadership strategies. And I think the idea for this working group was to see if developing a sector asset leadership strategy, similar to what we did for the NALs, but specific to law enforcement, would be beneficial. And of course, it wouldn't be at the minutia that probably we would like, given it's all law enforcement asset management, but just wanted to gain your thoughts, Eric and Al, on the benefits of a sector asset leadership strategy similar to what we did with the NALs. And Jim can jump in and add anything if I missed it there.
I don't have anything. Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. It's a new term for me, a sector asset leadership strategy. First time I saw it was yesterday. But I think it needs to, if there's initiatives that involve analytical, streamlining, and updating the areas like fleet, personal property, administrative services, any type of logistics, or even real property, that it aids in developing and improving DHS and ICE policies and mission and financial accounting and things like that. I think if you wrap all that together and there's some type of governance developed that guides the inventory and utilization of our assets, then I would be all for it.
And in my opinion, I think, I definitely like to be involved up front, but it will get to a point where we make a determination whether I'm the right person or who is the right person. We would rather bring the people in there that have the right answers or can give some quality or bring some value to the team. So I'll be willing to participate regardless to get the conversation started. and bring in who I need to bring in.
And I think illuminating all the similarities. Unfortunately, we didn't have our DOJ counterparts here who were part of the symposium, but identifying those similarities between the DOJ as well as other law enforcement entities. Department of State, right, has law enforcement entities. USDA. I think it will be a very beneficial best practice sharing. Oh, and here comes Jim.
Yeah, Moshe.
One word to share before Nick rounds us up, and that's been occurring to me increasingly through this, the sessions, at our event, and that word is structures. We've been calling it a national asset leadership strategy and sector asset leadership success strategies, but I'm starting to think the word structures might actually be a more useful term, or at least a concept we need to involve, because it's not like, okay, here, go do it. It's like, oh, here's how you can take Al's information and his insight that he's gained, and Eric's and FBI's, and say, here's stuff that's common to all of this. So you don't have to start at 0. You can start at 50 or 60 out of 100 and use these structures to get where you're trying to go, because we've already been there.
Thank you, Jim. I just want to briefly flash up this kind of organizational member slide here, because without these organizations, the Asset Leadership Network would not be able to put on an event like this. So we just want to make sure to get in a thank you to these organizations, and a thank you to all of you panelists and all of you attendees who are out there watching. If you want to hear more about this or have any specific questions that we didn't get to today, feel free to send any of us an email or info@assetleadership.net. You can send your questions there. And I won't end things now. I'll give you panelists a chance to have any closing comments or anything going forward. Back to you.
Well, I just want to say thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it and look forward to the next one.
Yes, Sal, I'd also like to say the same thing. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope that today we were able to communicate something that might be useful to the listeners and the ones that called in and listened to this today. I think there's some value that can be added to each and every one's organization. So again, thank you.
And thank you both. And thanks, David, for joining on behalf of Grant Thornton, Public Sector and Asset Management. Thanks for putting this together in the Asset Leadership Network. And it's always a joy to be a part of this working group, and just a great community that does a very meaningful mission.
Good. And I guess that leaves it to me to say thank you all. And we're our evolving plan for next year is to create more opportunities for people to get together and use the advantages of this virtual environment that makes it easier for us to get together in ways that can help us as individuals and as organizations, and looking for those win-win-wins that what the Asset Leadership Network is all about. So, and thank you, Moshe. Great job. And thanks to Grant Thornton.
Thanks, everyone.